Well, so, yeah, I'm supposed to talk loudly, so I'll try to talk loudly. Anyway, so, but mic obviously working, which is a bit of encouragement, because when you have such a large audience, it will help. Well, so I'm sort of asked to talk about, prospects of the hereditary succession. Therefore, I'm asked to talk about future. And humans cannot predict future. So I have to start from caveat, a very important caveat. I will try to talk about possible scenarios, about possible policies, which the North Korean government and other interested parties are likely to follow. But there is one serious caveat. We are talking future, and future is unpredictable. There have been some successful cases of very good prophecies, and I hope you are going to be exposed to one of such cases. But both you and me have to keep in mind that such cases are very, very unusual. Having said that, I will probably go to the business. Oh, sorry. I meant to wear suit, but something happened which prevented me from dropping to my home, so you have me in this kind of, less official attire. Anyway, so to start with, now we have a new leader in North Korea. The third generation hereditary transition, and North Korea is often described as the world's only communist monarchy. I have serious doubts whether we can really describe Korea now, North Korea, as a communist country in any sense, of which more later. But one of the things which is not probably related to the future but related to the past. If you make a sort of random search about North Korea in most newspapers, most media, you'll learn that it's irrational, unpredictable, ideology-driven Stalinist dictatorship. I believe that every single word is completely or largely wrong. It's highly rational. It's generally quite predictable. There are some exceptions. It's hardly Stalinist in most regards. And they basically know what they're doing. I would describe the current North Korean leaders, at least over 25 years, as the best bunch of Machiavellians currently in operation. They know what they are doing, and they are winners. They have survived. When there is often you can encounter in question, what are the strategic goals of the North Korean leaders? The strategic goal is simple. It used to be far more complicated. Say 30 years ago or 20 years ago, they dreamed about unification of the country under their control. Not the case anymore. They wanted economic development. Now they would not mind economic development, but it's also not their goal. Their goal is simple. They want to die natural death in their bed, not in exile, in very old age. Even though Kim Jong-un is probably too young to expect such an outcome, all people around him in their 60s and 70s are sufficiently old to entertain such idea, and they will probably succeed. I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. They will probably succeed. Because, look, back in the 1980s, I was a young Soviet postgraduate. And I remember the talks among the Soviet policy analysts. And the Soviet policy analysts were far more frank than most Westerners believed. And they were talking what is going to happen in North Korea. And back then I even saw some kind of confidential papers on this. It was almost unanimous expectation that after Kim Il-sung death, it will clearly collapse. Well, because it was why? Because it was so irrational, economically backward, strange system. It could not possibly survive. Maybe Hungary, maybe Czechoslovakia, but not them. And now what can we see? What has happened to these rational Hungarian leaders or East German leaders? Where are they now? Forgotten in the proverbial waste bin of history, much vilified in their own countries. With or without reasons, long story. I believe largely with reasons, but it's I would not get in this argument. But these people are alive. They are enjoying very agreeable lifestyle, nothing special. When they speak, say they are rich, they are not really rich, they are not seriously rich. The top North Korean elite, with the exception of the family, which is maybe 50 people, live essentially a successful North Korean, lives a lifestyle of a successful Kannam lawyer. Or if you come from the United States, a reasonably successful, not the top, reasonably successful lawyer living in Manhattan. Well, good lifestyle. I would not mind to have such. Most of you probably too. But it's clearly not, you know, oil sheikhs of Middle East. But they're having comfortable life, a lot of power, and they are in control. Why? Well, I believe that Kim Jong-il's policy, like it or not, was rational. Very rational indeed. And it's highly likely that Kim Jong-un, at least for the first few years of his rule, will follow his father's line. Because this line has worked perfectly well, partially. And even the young guy has some doubts about this. Possible. You know, young people are rebellious, you know. I'm judging by, well, it's not a place to explain it. But he is unlikely to be allowed. Sorry, today it will be roughly 4th and 5th hours of me talking loudly in a foreign language, which puts additional demand on articulation. I'm trying not to sound as too Ranglish. So, and before that I tried not to sound too Korean. Therefore, I have to, you know, smooth my throat with, don't consider me to be impolite. Yes, and I hope on supply of hot liquids provided by the organizers. Eventually, no, it will last for half an hour, Yeah, so talking about them. What are the basics of Kim Jong-un? Yeah, yes, first, he might understand that this policy has worked and should be continued, but even he does not. He has advisors. And one of things we have seen recently, that power transition was very, very smooth. Everything went exactly like expected. And so far, no signs of challenges, and what is important now, after the 4th conference, just 10 days ago, no new faces. We don't see people among the leaders who might be Kim Jong-un's drinking buddies. We have people still in the 60s and 70s who are old enough to be his fathers and grandfathers. Which means to me that he is not still in complete control. That he has not his own group, nobody good enough to be appointed. So he follows his father's advisors. Maybe he hates it, maybe he likes it, we don't know. Of course, every second week, some Japanese media, some Japanese newspaper will run sensational report, you know. For me, it's very simple. If it's in Japanese media, I don't consider it seriously. So that they just smuggled some document straight from Pyongyang. The secret conversation of Kim Jong-un and his mistress, from which everybody can see that he hates Chan Son-taek. And a couple of weeks later, journalists will publish another story how much he loves Chan Son-taek, because punishment for failure and misrepresentation is so light in this area, nobody will pay attention. No, pay attention, nobody will notice that it's changing, story is changing every few months. But we don't know. What is important, he's under control. He might like it, he might dislike it, he's under control. So, what is, in essence, the line, probably we can move it, because I did not prepare PowerPoints. Yes. Can you work out how to move it up? Yes. Yes.
I have no idea.
Yes, push buttons, because I will be distracted. Some buttons will work. Maybe like this. Or it's like an our audience. Yeah. So, because I occasionally write something on the whiteboard. Old technology. So, here, what is essentially the survival strategy? Never mind. Yes. Going down, up, and stopping. Yeah. Walked out. So, What is the basics of the survival? What is, I will say, a mystery of Kim Jong Il's survival? 4 secrets of Kim Jong Il. Well, maybe 4, maybe 5, depends. So, what is the basics of North Korean policy? I would say the first and basic rule is no reforms. I mean Chinese-style reforms, which means essentially introduction of market economy or using a dirty or C-word capitalism to China, wrapped in communist rhetoric, of course, for the sake of political stability. Many people say that North Koreans should do it, and I have been doing North Korea for 27 years. And every 4 or 5 years, I come across reports that North Korean leaders have finally decided to start reforms, so they would start immediately. First time I saw this report was 1984, the joint venture law. Then I saw it 1990. Nason, back then it was Rajin Sonbon, special economic zone. 2002, and probably we are going to see it again. Why no reforms? Because ostensibly, it looks like that North Korean economic situation, as a matter of fact, it's not as bad as most media would like you to believe. It's a disaster, but it's not a complete disaster. North Koreans are not starving anymore. They are simply malnourished, which is a great advance compared to what used to be 10 years ago. During the famine, between 500,000 and 1 million people starved to death. Again, figures you are likely to see 2 million, 3 million, gross exaggerations. But even if it's merely 500,000, still the worst humanitarian disaster since Mao's great leap forward in the modern history of East Asia. But having said that, it seems to be a very attractive solution. Look, do what Chinese did. Quietly introduce capitalism. Let people make money. Make economy rational. And then you will be sitting on the top. Everybody will love you. Economy will be growing. Wonderful. Look what happened in China, or for that matter in Vietnam. But there is one serious reason which makes Chinese-style reforms highly unlikely. Or if they really attempt such reforms, it will make reforming North Korea highly unstable. What I mean? Existence of South Korea. Reforms in China are possible because there is no such a thing as Southern China. Taiwan is way too small to make a difference. Chinese are, first, look, let's have a thought experiment. Let's think that Kim Jong-un will listen to our advice and indeed start reforms. What will happen? First, the North Koreans will learn about overseas prosperity. Now they are learning already, but this is a slow motion move. If you open the floodgate, they will be exposed to the graphic pictures, or absolutely, mind-blowing pictures of South Korean economic success. Yes, South Koreans know that their society has serious problems, but when looked from a side, it's quite attractive to somebody who is not North Korean. And the per capita income gap between North and South Korea is variously estimated as between 1 to 15 and 1 to 40. But even you believe the pessimists, if it's merely 1 to 15, per capita income gap, 1 to 15, it's still the world's largest gap between two countries which have land borders, which share land border. So, people will learn about it. Second, the degree of domestic surveillance will have to be reduced. You cannot have efficient market reforms in a country where you cannot call your overseas partner or send fax, where you need a police permit to travel outside your county and city of residence. You cannot possibly have it. So it means that people will be able to communicate and to exchange ideas. And the problem is that because of South Korea, these ideas are likely to be very subversive. So, end of the reforms means flood of information about the outside world and above all South Korea. It's not an issue in China. Because Chinese are aware that Americans are doing well. So what? United States is a different country. Japan is a different country. Their economic success does not demonstrate inefficiency of the Chinese government. And of course, China is not going to become the 51st state of the United States of America. They cannot unite with the United States. Yes, unification with Taiwan is unlikely to have any impact if you keep in mind the tiny population of Taiwan, 20 million. So, Chinese people do know about foreign prosperity, but they sort of accept developmental dictatorship, Chinese style, pretty much like a majority of the South Koreans accepted Park Geun-hye regime because they saw it as a lesser evil. And between you and me, I believe it might have been a lesser evil indeed, even though it's going to remain a controversial statement for centuries. We don't know. But it was seen as a lesser evil. In North Korea, people will have immediately an impression that first, an area, South Korea, which used to be backward, agricultural backwater, is living beyond any imagination. What does it say? It says that the government, this North Korean government, has ruined the country. And reformers, they will come from the same people who are running country now. Who else? And they will be held responsible. And even if they make a break, actually, even if they break a world record in the speed of economic growth, it will not help. Because the gap is too large to be leaped over in years. It will take decades. And for these decades, even if they are geniuses, the world's best, the best bunch of the economic managers the world has ever seen, it will not save them. Because their greatness will not be appreciated by their own people who will be looking at South Korea and who will be telling, we want it and we want it now. And they will be under illusion that by unification with the dirty rich South, they will get the same living standards immediately. Not going to happen, I know. And they will be much disappointed. And these illusions will lead to much disappointed eventually after unification, after collapse. But it will not help the North Korean decision makers who will be in prison, in exile, or maybe on the lampposts. And they don't want to take chances. Second, plus, on top of that, I already mentioned, in communist countries of East Europe and former Soviet Union, ex-communist countries, we saw that the social group which gained most of the system change were former elite. With few exceptions, post-Soviet states and some states of Eastern Europe, and of course China and Vietnam, are still run by the former Communist Party apparatchiks. And it's understandable. They've had more experience, connections, they were smart, or with a special type of smartness which is necessary for managing and doing politics, and above all, they had control over the state property. So, they're still in control. And they're doing actually much better than they could afford. They are living much better than they did live under the communist system. Because they are not now party-appointed managers who can be kicked out at any time and who have to be modest in their behavior. They are masters and owners. CEO. Nobody can really kick out. Not the case in North Korea. If you have collapse, North Korean elite believe that the South Koreans will come and take over. And they know how they would treat the South Korean elite have they won competition with the South. And they don't expect to be treated differently. So their assumption is that in the case of collapse, we should be afraid of our own people, they might lynch us, or South Koreans who will come and take over and will have no future. It's often said, you know, there is kind of, you know, soft-liners who are dealing with North Korea and always hear from them. They also have families. Of course, they do have families. They love their families. Of course, they love their families. It's exactly the reason why they are not going to change. Because they don't want their families to suffer the fate of Gaddafi family. What, can I blame them? Well, first find me in the world an elite which is happy about surrendering power. And but in their case, situation is much worse because they believe that for them to surrender means death. And reforms means suicide. Of course, I'm often privately said, there are some people who privately tell me, well, it sounds persuasive, but what if there is some very thin line they can walk? Maybe they can find a right proportion of terror, propaganda, economic growth. Maybe they find some social support, kind of allies within the state, so they will survive. Yes, I cannot rule out that reforming North Korea might be sustainable. But it's a really, I would say, thin rope walking. And for us it's wonderful. I'm drinking latte and talking about such and such probabilities. These people, for them, it's a life and death matter. And even if the survival chances are 50%, they are not likely to take the gamble. Exactly because they love their families. But I believe that their survival chances are well below 50%. So, this is rule number 1, which was well understood by Kim Jong-il. Whether it's understood by Kim Jong-un or not, we do not know. I'm inclined to believe it's understood, but maybe not. We will see it in due time, when he will finally start running the country according to his own ideas and to his own whim, and we don't know when it's going to happen, judging by what we saw over the last few weeks, not anytime soon. It's first rule. Second rule. Keep nukes. Rule number 2. Again, nukes are necessary because of 2 reasons. First, nukes means security. They understand, they assume that a country with nuclear weapons is not going to be invaded by anybody. And you can say they are paranoid. Nobody is going to invade them. Mind you, I'm sorry. They have seen what happened in Afghanistan. They have seen what happened in Iraq. Even if Mr. Obama has no such ideas, the Americans have a nice habit of changing the government every 4 years, otherwise known as democracy. So they cannot be certain about Mr. Romney or whoever. I'm not really tracing US presidential rate. I find politics in democratic states very boring. But anyway, so they cannot take it for granted, as they have seen how the fellow governments in the axis of evil, a fellow government, was invaded and destroyed. So they need it for security. And not only external security, but also internal security. Why? Do I mean that they are going to nuke rebel cities? Probably not. You never know, but highly unlikely. Why? What I mean is Libya. In Libya, the insurgency would probably be suppressed by the government forces without NATO support, without intelligence, without air cover, without special forces. Maybe not, but still there are good chances that has Libya had nuclear weapons, nobody would probably mingle with, intervene in the Libyan situation. So without such a support, Gaddafi's family would be quite happy, and he would spend nice evenings with his grandchildren after spending few hours in torture chambers looking what has been done to the former pro-democracy leaders. So, it's logic. Libyan case has demonstrated that a government without nuclear weapons, and this is what is very vulnerable, and what it makes it even worse. Libya has been many times American and not only American diplomats has pointed at Libya when talking to North Koreans as an example to emulate. Do a bit of search what, say, Ambassador Bolton said in 2005. And he was not the only one. I don't want to single out him out, because I like him actually. Everybody was saying so. So, but it's only first reason, maybe not the major reason why they need nukes. Not only security. You know, sometimes when people get angry with North Korea, they say, let them eat nukes. But sorry, they are doing exactly this for 20 years. The major component of their diet is nukes. What do I mean? Because they cannot do reforms. They cannot revive economy. Pigs don't fly. Stalinist economies, after a short boost of initial modernization, when they can make wonders, Stalinist economy is good if you have to run a country in emergency. It works very well for 10 years. Maybe 20 years at most, usually 10. And then it's spent. And you cannot restart it. And because they decided to keep the old system, which is not going to work. Which is not going to work. It means they are stuck with inefficient economy. They cannot even produce enough food to feed their own population. Just about food situation, few words. It's related to the nukes. In order to keep population alive, you need between 5.0 and 5.5 million tons of grain every year in North Korea. Their production is between 4.2 and 4.8 million tons a year. Shortage between 200, maybe quarter million, and 1 million tons, depending on the harvest and many other variables. So they need to cover it. How? Because their economy is not working, because they have Stalinist agriculture where nobody is too eager to work. Nukes. Blackmail. Because if you look at their economic size and population size, the closest analogs are such countries as Mozambique and Ghana. Have I been a specialist on Ghana? I don't think I would enjoy such a number of free foreign trips. Because, yes. As a matter of fact, Marcus Nolan, few people are aware, his major specialization is Ghana. But it's not why he's so famous. So, anyway. So, the reason why they manage to get food from the outside world, and they do manage to get, if you look at the World Food Program database, it's a wonderful place. You can find out who, when, how much, which type of food have sent over the last 20 years. You will see that they were getting, on the last 15 years, on the average, roughly 700,000 tons, 0.7 million tons a year. Major suppliers, essentially 4 suppliers. China, about a quarter, slightly over a quarter. Japan, United States, and South Korea. 3 countries which are technically at war with North Korea. Well, not technically, we can go to legal details, which is very interesting, but we are not. Anyway, technically at war, let's say so. Even if there are international law specialists here, they will be outraged, but I'm sorry. So, the reason why they are getting this food is because they are dangerous. What have been doing over the last 20 years It began under Kim Il-sung. They tried to make a deal. You don't like our nukes, guys? Wonderful. We are willing to slow down development or freeze our program for a brief while, as long as you are paying. And if you are not paying, deal is forgotten. Or a few years later, well, we have thought and we have realized that we are not paying as much as you should. So let's make another deal, or if you don't like, we have some nice ideas about uranium enrichment. It's how it has been working, and it has been working. Of course, it's not their major, it's not their only tool, because they are very good in using contradictions between South Korea, United States, and China. And they also want Russia and Japan back, but they are highly unlikely to succeed. However, nukes is their major tool. Therefore, they need nukes for both for dual purposes of deterrence and diplomacy. And without nukes, they will become defenseless, and they will also lose their major tool which allows them to get foreign aid in sufficient quantities. So, rule number 2. Rule number 3. Kill dissenters. All of them. Very simple. So, zero tolerance for any political dissent. Once again, one important remark. Contrary to what you often hear, North Korea has become less repressive over the last 20 years. Now, you can do something which would get you killed under Kim Il-sung, and you will even remain free. People ask about examples. I give just 2. There are many more. Maybe another. Well, 2 for the beginning. First, cross-border movement. If you run to China, and if you are intercepted, you are usually investigated, which might mean, but not necessarily so, a couple of broken teeth, and they want to check whether you have contacted in China dangerous people like foreigners, South Koreans, and Christian missionaries. If you say no, they usually don't have any proof, and they don't really work hard to prove otherwise. So you are sent to prison for a period of from 2 months roughly to 1 year. And it's more or less arbitrary, looks like. It depends on how you will like to be or dislike by your investigator. And then you are released. And you probably go to China again. 10 years ago, or more, 15 years ago, until mid-90s, an attempted escape to China would mean 5 years at least in prison, and then lifelong discrimination. Other change. Until a certain point, we don't know when it was changed. It seems that change happened 97, 98. In North Korea, all family members of a political criminal were sent to the prison camp as well. So if somebody committed a political crime, not only the person, but his entire family, all people who shared same address in their household registration papers, had to go to prison, not to be released until the major male factor, whichever you say, criminal, who made a joke about the leader, or maybe just nothing, is either dead or released. Now, in most cases, they do not send families into the prison. It still happens, but it used to be universal rule. Now it's done if there is a special decision. In most cases, families are not in prison. They are discriminated. They are usually removed from Pyongyang, but they are alive and not in prison. And we can continue. But having said that, it's still the country which treats its political criminals with exceptional brutality. Not as bad as used to be, but still very bad. they have, again, various estimates. I believe that the most reliable is something like 150,000 people in prison. To put things in comparison, in the Soviet Union, under Brezhnev, the number of the political prisoners never exceeded 1,000. Population of the Soviet Union was 10 times larger. Number of political prisoners 150 times smaller. You see the difference? I'm talking about not Stalin era. They still have Stalin level. The number of the ratio of political prisoners to the general population is roughly same as in the Soviet Union in the last years of Stalin's rule, but well below what it used to be in the 60s and 70s. So, they do not tolerate any dissent. And they should not. Because with South Korea just across the border, with an incurable economic crisis, an attempt to tolerate dissent might lead to instability and regime collapse. And this is not what they want. And it's not only killing dissenters. The only place, the only kind of, they can have all their dissenters dead only. But also breaking horizontal connections. Making sure that people will not create their own groups and organizations, even ostensibly non-political. Because if you look at how pro-democracy movement began to develop in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, you saw that in many cases these connections, networks, were established within non-political, ostensibly non-political groups. They do not tolerate anything which is not run by the government. And they should not tolerate if they want to reach their great goal of living in the age of 85 in their bedroom. So, it's rule number 3. And there is rule number 4, which is most tricky, and I need to make a bit of, detour, if my English is correct, to explain. What's happening? The fact that they have not reformed the country should not be understood as a statement that North Korea has not changed. North Korea under Kim Jong-il is dramatically different from North Korea under his father. North Korea under Kim Jong-il is essentially a market economy. Under Kim Il-sung, you had a society of the total distribution. From the 60s, essentially nothing was sold in North Korea. The government decided how much food you should eat, how often should you have meat, and how many pairs of shoes you are going to be issued. It was given to you by the government, heavily subsidized prices, essentially for free. But there was little outside the system. Now, one of the reasons why I don't buy a very common description of North Korea as a Stalinist country is that the old state economy is dead. Almost dead, not completely. The industrial output is between 1/3 and 1/2 of what it used to be in 1990. They don't publish statistics at all. Everything is secret. But the industrial output is between 1/3 and 1/2 of what it used to be. According to the estimates, something like 75% of the income of the average North Korean family comes from the black market activities. If you think it's a bit like, it's capitalism, but it's a bit like African or Indian South Asian capitalism. A very small amount of capital, huge corruption, low level of organization. But people are now most people make a living outside the state economy. There is a significant growth of the private agriculture. It's illegal, but many people do it. smuggling, household production, small workshops, private, state companies, which are actually private companies, like, say, eateries. If you go to Pyongyang, most of you have seen a restaurant boom in Pyongyang, and you see a lot of rich people in Pyongyang, as a matter of fact, and only some of them are corrupt officials, while others are black market operators. You can write and run a private restaurant. Of course, officially it will belong to the government, and it will be registered as a government, but you just pay a bit to the officials, and it's yours. You can run a private mine, coal mine, or I even know a person who used to run a gold mine, and sitting here, he's sort of participating in this activity still, from South Korea. Bus company, name it. So it's a kind of private economy. They are not happy about it, because they understand that in the long run, this grassroots market economy is dangerous for the region. First, people are learning, the younger generation have learned that they can make a living outside the government and without government at all. It's you. Second, markets are hotbeds for the spread of rumors about the outside world, because people meet and people talk. This is the reason why the government fights with the markets. And have I had more time, I can basically spend 2 hours talking only about this kind of fencing match between the government and market forces. For market forces in advance, government in advance. Market forces now it seems, well, in 2009, well, from 2005, government tried to squeeze the market economy because they assume that with having nukes, they can get enough aid and go back to the distribution-centered economy. They did not succeed. In 2009, they had the currency reform, which can be seen as the world's most badly executed currency reform ever. And, well, imagine, essentially what they did. They said that new currency, usual restrictive currency reform, communist countries did it, and not only communist countries did it. South Korea did it in the early 60s. West Germany did it in the late 40s. But there was a very interesting twist. I strongly suspect that Kim Jong-il's idea, he is very smart in politics and very, I'm sorry, stupid when it comes to economy. So, he obviously what happened? Well, they said that all salaries will be paid in new currency, which was technically 100 times more valuable, but the old amount, which means overnight 10,000% increase in salaries. All salaries, 10,000% overnight. Tidal wave of cash, inflation, back to square one in half a year, and everybody angry. Anyway, it was a successful attempt to wipe out private economy. And since that fiasco, for over 3 years, they never touched market. Only January this year, they issued an order that from now on they cannot use currency, foreign currency. But the problem is they keep issuing order. From now on you cannot use currency. From now on you cannot sell grain. As a matter of fact, private sale of grain was banned in 1957, banned again, ban was never lifted, but it was banned again. Unlifted ban was repeated in 1997, then in 2004, then in 2005, then in 2009. Nobody paid attention. Women were prohibited. Men were prohibited from trading, from showing up on the market as merchants. Couple of months, forgotten. Women below the age of 50 forbidden to trade. Well, it took a few weeks before it was forgotten. Women were forbidden to ride bicycle. Wow, everybody does it. And so. So they basically have a lot of, they cannot enforce laws. There are some laws they can enforce. rule number 3. Or say they are quite good in controlling Pyongyang, but when it comes to controlling market, people who are supposed to enforce laws, a low-level police sergeant on the beat, he is taking his money from the market traders. If he succeeds, he will live on his 540 grams of bad corn a day. And now, because he can't get this money from the traders, he feasts on pork every day. Does he want to be strict? Of course. And plus, he's just sympathetic. He's just humans. Because I believe that in many cases, they cannot enforce it, not only because the low-level enforcers have vested interest in not enforcing these anti-market laws, but also because they are humans. Anyway, so it was another fiasco this January, but it was interesting because it was the first attempt in 3 years to do something about market. Basically, so markets keep growing, and information from the outside world is getting in. Major mover is DVD player. It will be a mild exaggeration to say that the Soviet Union was destroyed by a shortwave transistor radio. In North Korea, the same role is played by a DVD player. Unlike tunable radios, you know, in North Korea, it's a crime to have tunable radio. Yes? If you have, theoretically, you can go to prison. All officially sold radios have fixed tuning on the official broadcast since the mid-1960s. Anyway, but unlike radios, DVD players are legal. And there are many people who have it. Because you can buy a DVD player for something like $30 in China. $30, it's roughly the average monthly income of a North Korean family. Official salary is much below, but who does live on the salary these days? Nobody. Actual income is about 100,000, average income 100,000 North Korean won, which by black market exchange rate equivalent to 25, 30, 35 US dollars. Well, it means that it's basically as affordable as a used car here. Not cheap, but not too expensive. Most people have it. Officially, they are allowed to buy it in order to watch biopics of the dear leader. But of course, they strongly prefer martial arts movies from Hong Kong and smuggled South Korean soap operas. So, even language is changing. One of my Russian colleagues, who has absolutely unbelievable command of Korean, and who is slightly pro-North Korean himself, was shocked to discover back in 2002 or 2003, when it was just beginning, after his trip to Pyongyang, that suddenly people began to use South Korean forms of polite speech and address. You don't hear Tongmu and Tongji. Well, you do hear, but not as frequently as it used to be. So, the case. Influence of fashion, everybody, not everybody, but a significant, maybe still significant minority, maybe slight majority has watched these movies. Of course, they don't believe what they see completely. They cannot believe that, you know, it's a country where everybody has a car. Unbelievable. Because their own film movies over-exaggerate, they expect South Korean movies to present a kind of seriously embellished picture, which is, you can say that, you know, soap operas about love of lawyer's family in Gangnam does not really truthfully present life of the average South Korean family. It's true, but they expect much greater level of exaggeration. Still, they understand that there are things which cannot be faked, like, say, Cityscape of Seoul. And it's beginning to dawn of the North Koreans that South Korea is doing well. And as a matter of fact, roughly 10 years ago, the tenor of the North Korean propaganda in dealing with South has changed dramatically. They don't say anymore that South Korea is poor. Official picture used to be that South Korea is dirty, poor. So South Korean students have to sell their blood to pay for their textbooks. But most of them cannot study anyway. They are polishing shoes of the American occupying soldiers. Not the case anymore. They sort of reluctantly and kind of indirectly admit that South Korea is doing relatively well. And they're looking for other advantages. Like, in the past, they used to show themselves as an industrial stronghold. Chimneys, steel mills, huge clouds of smoke. While South Korea, in the depiction of the 70s, thatched roof huts, unpaved road, beggars, and fat, drunk American soldiers. And also their lackeys is always in the black sunglasses. Not anymore. Now, South Korea is presented as an inferno of industrial pollution. These clouds of smoke, chimneys everywhere. While North Korea, surprise, is a pristine paradise. You can find in, children's stories of a tortoise. I cannot produce kobuni. How is it? Tortoise? Tortoise. Turtle. Small turtle from South Korea who was suffering because of chemical industry everywhere. So the poor animal had to flee to the north. And now happily splashing the crystal waters of the North Korean streams. Such stories. But they have to change. And they had to change because they now understand that the old story does not sell. And so people are increasingly independent of the government. People are beginning to understand that they are not living in a paradise. And these are bad news for the regime. So what to do about it? And here it's a tricky part, the most difficult part, and I'm pretty sure that sooner or later they will not get it right. But I don't know when. Control the markets. Keep this spontaneous grassroots capitalism under control. But, and the keyword is but not over-control the markets.
Control what?
Control, but not excessively control. Control the markets, but not excessively. Because if the government allows a free growth of market, it's dangerous because of the developments I have described. But if it becomes too harsh, if it hits too harsh, it might really get a backlash. Sufficient to say that the hardest hit against the markets of the 2009 currency reform also produced an absolutely unique situation when many my foreign contacts in Pyongyang of all levels began to tell that their North Korean counterparts and contacts, at first time within their memory, began to criticize the government policy. Just one example, maybe the most striking, but by no means the only one. A military attaché of one Western country, not exactly friendly to North Korean government, was talking to his counterpart, a guy, by definition, a guy in the military intelligence of North Korea. Well, a spy. And the guy, when they were discussing their, spies were discussing their espionage businesses, he just said, sometimes I think that our government doesn't understand what the hell it's doing with the economy. Can you imagine in a Stalinist country, an intelligence service guy saying something like that? He should be boiling. And it was understandable because I will not go into details. There was a period for 1 month when even you were very high in the pecking order, unless you were a member of the family with the capital F. You would have trouble in getting food in Pyongyang immediately after the currency reform. You could be a successful smuggler, first-class drug dealer, the best torture specialist, and you would have problems with providing for your family. So, well, They were angry. So try to control the markets, but not too much. Remember that if you are too liberal, these forces will probably get rid of you soon. But if you hit them hard, remember where Arab Spring began. So this is the rules. And as I have said, there are good reasons to believe that General Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader, it's his now new title, is likely to follow these rules in the foreseeable future. Even if he doesn't agree with these rules, even if he really wants to do some reforms, I don't think he will be allowed to do so far. But what will happen next? Well, I think that the major problem North Korea faces now is I don't see how this situation can possibly end up well. In the long run, North Korea is not sustainable, and its collapse is likely to be violent. The major problem is that they cannot do anything about economy. At best, they can manage a moderate economic growth. So economy will be improving, but much slower than economy of all their neighbors. So the gap will be growing, and the explosive potential of the gap will be growing as well. And I don't see what they can do about it. Of course, once again, they can risk a reform, and maybe they will survive, but probability is not high. So sooner or later, the situation will end up in disaster. There is another important variable, which is making them again unstable in the long run: the generational shift. I talk to the North Koreans a lot, roughly 4 or 5 times a week. And what is clear, people who are now in their 20s and early 30s, they have very different ideas compared to their parents. First of all, they don't see the distribution-based economy as the only possible system or even the best system. They know that North Korea is a very poor place. They are less afraid of the government, because government has become less repressive, partially because of the policy changes and partially because of corruption. Huge corruption, I should mention it. You can buy your way out of trouble easily if you have enough money. So they are less afraid of the government, they are more knowledgeable of the outside world, and they don't share the basic assumption of the system. That Stalinist, Kim Il-sungist economy is viable and indeed the best way how society should be run. These people are still young, but in due time they will become a majority. Of course, there are forces who contribute into supporting the status quo. To start from, all outside powers, with the possible exception of the United States, occasionally, wants status quo to be maintained. In this regard, I would say that the Kim family are unusually lucky dictators, because nobody around really wants them to collapse, including South Korea. Because lip service in South Korea is always paid to the idea of unification. But if you start seriously talk to the South Koreans about unification, you will easily discover that a significant number of the South Koreans, including a majority of those below the age of 30, don't want unification. Actually, because they don't want to pay. And you can say they are so egoistic, but imagine, if you are, say, well, Americans, and what about joining, say, well, entire South America with the United States? Well, maybe, maybe Central America will do. On the assumption that all these countries, all their population will get same social security benefits. Will you be very happy about it? Probably not. So you can understand, because Korea used to be a very poor country. After decades of unbelievably hard work, which has few precedents in the world's history, Koreans made a developed society. And they are not going to sacrifice it for their neighbors, whom they increasingly see as foreigners who happen to speak the same language. And this is sort of understandable. So South Korea does really want change. Some forces in South Korea does want change. The average mainstream public opinion pays lip service to the idea of unification, because right and left in this highly politicized country agree that unification is the best thing which can possibly happen, even though in the depths of their heart they also have increasingly serious doubts about it. But, so you are conditioned, whether you read Choson Ilbo or Hangul Sinmun, to believe that unification is good. But you don't believe it really. So you just pay lip service, and you make a very important caveat. I'm for unification, but preferably not in my lifetime. Usually it's said, we are not ready yet. You can check my generalization later tonight, having surgery with your Korean friends. I will say 3/4 of your conversation will probably confirm what I say. 1/4 will be different. Well, it's, you know, pluralist society. Talking about this, everybody wants status quo. It's their first pro-stability force. And the second pro-stability force is internal. The problem is that a very significant minority, not a very, just significant minority of the North Koreans have a stake in the system. It's different from other dictatorships, from other authoritarian regimes, including communist regimes. Everybody who is somebody in North Korea believes that regime collapse will be very bad for him, her, and their family. It's not the case, say, in Egypt. The revolution in Egypt, if you are commanding your 10th battalion somewhere on Sinai Peninsula, Mubarak or not, Islamist or not, you are going to be promoted to lieutenant colonel next year. At least this is what you believe, and you are probably right. It's in the capital. Same was in the Soviet Union, as I have said. The former party apparatchiks got much from the regime collapse. In North Korea, everybody who is somebody, even if you are now a battalion commander in the military or a low-level health official, you have reasons to believe that in case of regime collapse, you will be kicked out of your job. Plus, you should not forget that it's essentially, in many regards, a near-feudal society. Hereditary system. People who are running the show now, third generation, not only in the very top. Ministers are children of ministers, and sometimes grandchildren of ministers. You know, colonels are grandchildren of colonels, and so on. So they have stakes. How many people are elite members? How many people believe that their future depends on the stability? Well, maybe 1 or 2 million. Minority, the total population is 25 million. But these people, they are well organized, they are well educated, at least much better educated than anybody else, and they control pretty much everything. And it's not incidental then one of the most common questions you are likely to encounter when you go to North Korea is, what has happened to the East German apparatchiks? So they understand, and they are afraid. However, I believe that this outside and inside pressure is not going to hold forever. Eventually things will go down. How? Well, I don't know what will become the first spark. It might be, if you like, Tunisian scenario. You know, a fist fight on the market where police tries to arrest a popular merchant, and then you have riot, loss of control of the city of Pyeongchang, the place where the largest wholesale market is located, and next day, Kim Jong-un is rushing to the airfield to get the last reliable, to get to the last reliable helicopter, how do you say, squad, to fly to China. Maybe. Another option is that probably some elements in the military who have slightly less stakes, we see military as headliners, they are. But the military also can say, to quote a Russian journalist who was talking exactly on this issue, he said, the military can lie, can say eventually, they will be able to say eventually, they have heroically heroically slept through all indoctrination sessions. Because if you are in the military, you can basically, it's plausible deniability of your connection to the regime. We were serving the country, not the regime. So maybe some elements of the regime, of the military, might eventually stage a coup. Not likely anytime soon, but you can never rule it out. Maybe on their own initiative, maybe with foreign encouragement, and when I say foreign encouragement, I mean above all China. But not anytime soon, because right now China is extremely unconditionally pro-status quo. We can also rule out, and for me it looks quite possible, that Kim Jong-un, once he gets rid of his aged advisors, will think of what he studied, what he has used to study in Switzerland, and try to run reforms, forgetting these basic rules. Well, maybe because he will just have a bleeding heart. You never know. You never know. Because many children of the warlords and mass murderers, after being educated in, Sorbonne, came back, human-loving, human creatures, humanitarian concerns, bleeding heart, everything. Maybe he's one of these. He's going to pay for it, unfortunately. But, possible. And of course, contamination. Not from the Arab Spring, because when people were talking about Arab Spring, it was irrelevant. Middle East is irrelevant to North Korea, full stop. Whichever happens in the Middle East, just put it in context. Will any result of presidential elections in Brazil have serious impact on the coming US presidential elections? No. US voting public simply don't care about Brazil. It's irrelevant. Same situation in Korea, North Korea. Middle East is irrelevant. What is relevant? China. And if we have a massive outbreak of pro-democracy movement in China, not likely to happen now, but God knows what is going to happen. We are talking long term. Maybe. Or maybe combination of the above mentioned factors. Or maybe something sudden. Like, Kim Jong-un is young, but he might have a heart attack tomorrow. God knows. We sort of assume that he's going to live long life, probably. But, well, maybe unhealthy diet, clearly. Maybe some other problems, things happen. A lot of unexpected things might happen. But, having said that, it seems that sooner or later something will happen, because in the long run, the system is unsustainable, and it will go down. How? Well, questions when? How, when and how, and warning signs. When? I sometimes see myself, because I occasionally love to talk about the future, even though I do want myself not to be over-engaged with these dubious activities, because even if I get very close to the truth, which is not very likely, still I'm bound to say something stupid. But I just love to talk about the future. Anyway, so sometimes I find somebody quoting me or mentioning that Lankov said. Sometimes I read, Lankov said that the regime is going to collapse soon. Sometimes I said, Lankov said that it's going to last for decades. Well, I always say both things. So just for I just repeat my usual description. Sorry, a bit of self-repetition and self-repetition. We simply do not know. Collapse might happen tomorrow. It might have begun right now. But I will not be surprised if tomorrow we will learn about outbreak, about riots in Pyeongchang. But I will not be equally unsurprised if in the year 2027 we are going to discuss the thermonuclear blast, the third thermonuclear test, and the 25th successful test of a long-range missile. Or maybe unsuccessful, because they obviously have more problems with missiles than with nukes. So, we simply do not know. Because we have no idea to see how rotten the system has become. We are outsiders. Who does know? Well, you know, I just think about my youth in the Soviet Union in the 70s and 80s. And I can tell you that you read books, they say, people did not expect collapse of the Soviet Union. Rubbish. I did expect. And I even did my planning, life planning, on the assumption that the Soviet system would collapse. And I'm not saying, look how great I am, how smart I am. No. It was a common assumption in my social group. My friends, back then in our very late teens, high school and university students, well educated, with great interest in history and politics, talked about it as about a highly likely scenario. I was one of them, and it was a sort of common assumption in my social milieu. System will go down. We were thinking about the end of the 1990s. It happened earlier because of Gorbachev. I believe that had we had a couple of smart students from Kim Il-sung University, or maybe not Kim Il-sung University, they are too privileged, somebody close to the earth, and talk to them, they might know, they might feel. We do not. The only thing we can see from outside is the system is rotten, but we don't know how seriously it's rotten. As a matter of fact, I remember how I was arguing about it with my mother. And when my mother now expresses doubts about my wisdom, and I want to push her to something, I keep reminding her about it. Because she said, what's the rubbish you're talking about? Nothing is going to change. Everybody is docile and basically content with the situation. And everybody says something, he will be killed in no time. I said, Mom, it's not Stalin era. Nobody is going to kill anybody because nobody wants to kill anybody. People changed. Well, anyway, same situation in North Korea. But we don't know how rotten it has become. It's a problem. We don't know. So, very little warning sign. Of all scenarios I have described, of all scenarios, only the attempted reforms will give us some warning time. If they start reforms, we are likely to see a great hype about reforms. You know, CNN will broadcast a reportage, a pro-news, you know, kind of, you know, maybe about opening of a McDonald's or maybe Kentucky Fried Chicken outlet of Kim Il-sung Square. You know, Bloomberg will talk about the stock exchange open in Pyongyang. Maybe Fox, even Fox, will interview an iconoclastic North Korean academic who will bravely tell to his students in Kim Il-sung University that Kim Il-sung was merely 85% correct. Everybody will, Pyongyang Spring, what a wonderful life. They have finally seen the truth, what a wonderful future. My advice in this time to all governments concerned, including my native government of Russia, start moving troops to Korean borders. Think where you are going to place a couple of million refugees, some of whom well armed and quite violent. Notify your counterintelligence services that the probability of large-scale smuggling of nuclear technology and fissile material will increase dramatically in 3 to 5 years' time. If they start reform, I would probably bet 3 to 1 or maybe 4 to 1 that they will collapse in a few years' time. Maybe not, maybe they will find this balance, but probability is not very high. All other probability, it will just happen out of the blue. Maybe the guy in the blue house, or maybe it will be the lady by that time. I'm not so optimistic to say it will be lady. 5 years, and next one probably will be, blue. Anyway, whoever, gender irrelevant, a president of the Republic of Korea will learn about the beginning of the crisis, outbreak of the crisis, not from National Intelligence Service, but from newspaper. Easy. So we don't know when, with a little warning time, and what is probably the worst actually news, I don't believe it's going to be a velvet revolution. The North Korean, it's a problem that there is a small but significant number of North Koreans who have vested interest in keeping system going, who will believe, rightly or wrongly, that the regime collapse will spell disaster to their entire life. And they will probably decide to go down fighting, like supporters of Gaddafi did. Please don't tell me that it was these nasty African mercenaries who were fighting there. No. And it's not incidental that his large stronghold was his rival capital. So, and look at Syria. Don't tell me that it's, a bloodthirsty government. Well, if you look at the religious composition of Syria, you can make some wonderful discoveries. Who is fighting whom? But, so there is a group, and it has nothing to do with democracy, as a matter of fact. It has a lot to do with religious composition of, very unusual, of Syria. But, so there are groups who believe, it was in Gaddafi Libya, and in Syria now, that collapse of the regime will mean that they will lose everything. Essentially because they are minority now. It was minority rule in most cases. And it's minority rule in North Korea, if you like. Because it's hereditary group, 1 million, 2 million people, in control for half a century, they are minority. And they will fight it. And what still, they will have hope, not quite unrealistic, that China will come to rescue. Not because China wants to get involved, but it's quite possible that China cannot accept a crisis in the neighboring country. So, if there is a collapse of law and order in North Korea, a significant minority, yes, overall maybe 5 or 10% of the population at most, more likely 5, but well organized, well trained, with arms, and believing themselves to be cornered, but having a hope that if they hold on long enough, Chinese paratroopers will show up. And they might. Not because China wanted, but because China cannot tolerate a long-term civil war in the neighboring country. And also because South Korea and the United States, we cannot be certain whether they will intervene. The problem is now, I believe that China doesn't want to get involved, but it can rule it out because it cannot tolerate instability. And the thing which might make Chinese intervention highly likely, or indeed unavoidable, is lack of resolve in South Korea and the United States. And as I have said, as time goes by, South Korean public is increasingly losing interest and enthusiasm about unification. So say, 10 years ago, in the case of a massive revolution in North Korea, with crowds waving Tae Key and yelling Long Live Republic of Korea, Taehanmin movement said, a South Korean intervention was foregone conclusion. I am not sure whether it will be the case in 20 years' time. Maybe yes, maybe no. And if no, China. And emergence of a pro-Chinese puppet government. So the final outcome, actually, I can see only two. Either a pro-Chinese satellite regime or unification with North Korea, South Korea. Essentially unification by absorption. Both are not very nice options, and both are much better than what we have now. So we can, I should be sort of optimistic. But it's going to be violent, and especially if it happens to coincide with an unusually harsh phase in the relations between the United States and China. Two major superpowers, each having its own, I would dare to say, being a kind of supporter of the pragmatist school in the international relations theory. They are quite understandable imperialist tendencies. If this crisis will coincide with a especially tense phase, in the phase of tension in the relations between Beijing and Washington, it might be even dangerous for the world peace. If not, it still be quite dangerous for people who are going to live in this city by that time, including myself, because I'm not going to leave this city anymore. So I think it's now, as I have said, 3 minutes earlier than we have. Agreed? Yes, and it's time for questions.
Okay. Anyone Another question? Okay, go ahead.
I think there's been a lot of speculation about when the nuclear will collapse, and many people have commented, I'm sure you've heard some of the speculation that it's not necessarily about, that the political regime in North Korea also, there's a certain mentality or culture that is preventing some kind of revolution from happening or revolt from happening. And this is something that maybe you may not agree with, but I've actually heard other North Korean defectors talk about as well. And in a recent conversation I've had with someone who was a fairly high, like a part of the intellectual elite in Pyongyang, he mentioned that he thinks the reason why there is no collapse is because of the lack of any kind of civic education. So the kind of education here.
Yeah, so question is, whether North Korean culture is anti-revolutionary? I would say probably yes. Which means which can postpone the outcome, but not prevent it. North Koreans are indeed badly organized. There is no civic education and civic spirit. And what I put in a different way, no horizontal connections. People are terrified of the government. They don't see any alternative. But having said that, we have here been told that Arabs are anti-revolutionary. We have seen it right now. And I just remind you about my talks with my mother 30 years ago. It's exactly what she said. And she was not either pro-communist or anti-communist. She expected this as, what she lives, and she saw some advantages and disadvantages, and she is still quite ambiguous about the present and the past, neither way. But for her it was kind of, we are so afraid and nobody will dare, and if there is a strike or whichever, it will be suppressed, crushed in no time, nothing will happen. It was roughly 1978. So I think that it's, and again, it might be a bit of mistake if we are talking to the elder generation and people in power. They tend to say so. If you talk to the young people, you get slightly different picture. And I believe it's a telling difference. So I don't see how it can be sustained for such a long time. And maybe it will help them to find this thin balance, very delicate balance, if they try to do reforms. But again, risks are too high.
Thanks for coming, Andrei. I always love to hear you speak. North Koreans who live in China, it's said, are much more aware now than when defectors initially started coming out that it's difficult to adjust to life here in South Korea. And for that reason, a lot of them are deciding not to come to Korea and go to other places. Do you have a sense of whether that news or that information has made its way into North Korea? So that when North Koreans are watching these South Korean dramas, do they see that as a possibility for their own life, or do they see that as something that even if reunification happened, that they could not access?
Problem is they don't understand it. They have to, people who move to China, they come to understand because they hear a lot of stories. And they start looking for other countries, which is a big mistake, because they end up discovering that in Canada or UK, they have an added disadvantage of a language barrier and cultural shock. So this kind of naive expectations that we should not go to South Korea where we are likely to be discriminated, and we should go to a third country where they are so generous with support for the asylum seekers, usually these people end up badly. And I would expect that this trend will be soon reversed. Having said that, if we have a massive exposure, it will be so attractive, that it will become almost irresistible. I saw it in the Soviet Union in the late 80s. I cannot say that there were no voices around warning that it will take decades before the Soviet Union will catch up with the United States and developed West. But these voices were largely disregarded by the majority because the picture was so attractive, so glittering. And people are very reluctant to admit their own shortcomings. What you say is going to become, if it ends up with unification, I would expect a great deal of mutual dislike and distrust between the ex-Northerners and ex-Southerners. One of my best friends is John, so I know how it feels. And I saw it from the East German perspective in the case of Germany. North Koreans will see South Koreans as greedy, arrogant, and discriminating. In some cases it will be discrimination, but the problem is that in many cases North Koreans are simply, objectively speaking, not suitable for the high-skilled labor. Because if you have an engineer who might have, a North Korean engineer, who might have better ideas of calculus than the average South Korean engineer, but never ever used computer, well, such a person, when he's not getting job in Hyundai Motors, he will probably see it as discrimination. Because unlike these silly South Korean guys, he can do basic calculations using a piece of paper and pencil. Yes, but it's not a valuable skill nowadays. Which might show that he's really smart. Not going to happen. But he's not going to accept it. So it will be a problem. But on the second stage. On the first stage, when they see it, wow, we also want to live like that. I've been through this stage. I saw how it was happening in the Soviet Union. This glittering image of the West, of the United States above all, but not only. The assumption that it's just beyond the corner. Back then, pro-Western reformers, they made a program which was called 500 days. It's how much? Yes. It's a period of time they wanted to catch up with the developed world. 500 days. Have a full functioning market economy working as impeccably as, say, economy of Germany or maybe Japan. So it will be seen. And I think that one of the reasons, one of the things we are going to tell North Koreans, we should warn them about coming trouble. To sort, if you like, to make them, in English, inoculate them against these excessive illusions and inflated expectations.
Thanks very much for your presentation. Can I just ask, the international community, particularly the US, are struggling with the whole idea still of a nuclear North Korea. I kind of agree with you that maybe the reality seems to be that North Korea has no intent, will never give up its nuclear weapons.
Never.
It's the reason danger of its kind of keeps it going. Do you think the only thing to do then is to try and for those outside beyond China and South Korea to flood North Korea with information about what the outside world is, and to try and encourage what you're suggesting, the eventual collapse in the fastest possible way?
I believe it's the only way, but it's not going to work, but don't expect an immediate impact. And this is a problem, because I keep talking about it for roughly a decade. People first feel interested. Wow, sounds interesting, because I go to a lot of details I'm not going to discuss right here, right now. But, sex education, when is it going to produce results? I say, well, 10 years if we are very lucky, maybe 20, 30. And people immediately lose interest, because they want something by the next elections. Having said that, your first question, remark about nucleus. Well, people are uncomfortable. Well, there is a lot of things we are uncomfortable about. Now I'm uncomfortable about my daughter's school fees. Very uncomfortable. And when I think that I'm going to die and all my family members are going to eventually die, I'm awfully uncomfortable with this idea. Yes, and there is a long list which takes volumes of things I'm uncomfortable. What can I do about it? So, Americans, or whoever, what can be done about North Korean news? In the long run, nothing. There are some ways which can be done, and I'm sort of quietly arguing in favor of this solution, which I would usually describe as painkillers solution. Not treatment, just painkillers. Except, not now, not in a hurry. It should be done gradually with a lot of, feet dragging, right English? Feet dragging? Feet dragging and everything. But accept them, because what North Koreans want now, what North Korean leaders want, They don't want denuclearization. They will never talk about denuclearization, but they want nuclear arms restriction treaty. They want a deal with the United States along such lines. Look, we are going, essentially 1994, revised, Geneva Framework Agreement. Geneva Framework Agreement. We agree to put our program, nuclear program, under the international control to some extent. Of course, we will be cheating, but to some extent. And we are willing not to advance it first, but on explicit or implicit assumption that we are allowed to keep stockpiles of plutonium and now highly enriched uranium as well by now, and the nuclear devices we have produced. Because for the dual purpose of blackmail and security, it's sufficient to have roughly 10 nuclear devices they have produced. If they produce 100, their security and ability to blackmail is not going to increase tenfold. It will probably not increase at all. And they are not going to outproduce Los Alamos and Arzamas 16. So, sufficient number they have already, have more or less sufficient number. So the deal might be, look, we are going to stop and don't make more if you are going to pay us. And please no investment. We are not interested in investment. Because really, it's something which is not understand. They are not interested in economic growth. It's something you have to keep in mind dealing with North Korea. We are so used to the idea that every government cares about economy above all. That its ability to stay in power or its place in history textbook, or both, depends on the economic efficiency. Not the case with North Korea. They don't mind economic growth. It's important. They don't mind it. As long as they are not going to see the North Korean economic miracle from their narrow window of their prison cell. So, for them it's much safer to have not uncontrolled investment, but transfer of money to them, to their pockets. Not because they will spend it on their luxurious lifestyle, just a fraction. A significant part, maybe most of the money, will go to the people. But they will decide whom to give and how much, and will help them to increase local stability. So they will say, look, we are going to do it if you are going to pay us. Monthly payments, a lot of monthly payments, light water reactors in 5 years, then something else in another 5 years, and don't forget free oil, and don't forget this and that. If you are paying, and as long as you are paying, the deal will work. What they want? My suggestion, which is not going to be popular anytime soon, but if the North Korean government remains in power, sooner or later Americans will understand that the alternative, Americans will tell you, wow, it's unthinkable. It's paying the blackmailer. Of course it's paying the blackmailer. But between you and me, a significant part of the population for the entire history has been paying blackmailers on the daily basis. Read something about medieval Europe. And their deals with castle lords. So, alternative is growing North Korean nuclear program. Sooner or later they will start producing uranium. Maybe they will try to proliferate, selling the stuff to the highest bidder. Maybe, just maybe, they will finally succeed with missiles. Alternative is even less attractive. So maybe, just maybe, if this regime will stay in power for more than a few years, which is highly likely but not certain, Americans will finally accept the deal. But when accepting it, it should not be seen as a solution. It's just a way to freeze the problem, to postpone. As they have said, not treatment, but a painkiller. And it should be seen as a painkiller. When you are taking Panadol, you are not curing yourself. You are just making your life slightly less troublesome. Yeah, so you have posed many questions.
Alan. So under scenario B, where North Korea does inevitably collapse, and scenario B, it's slow unification with South Korea, what do you think are the short and long-term consequences for South Korea, which is, has become a large top 15 player in the world. What are the short-term and long-term?
I would tell you like a Korean nationalist. There is a South Korean, North Korea specialist whom I respect very much. And recently we were driving a long way from, actually it was about the grant money, and they, as I usually are distributed in the wonderful great city of Daejeon, and we were driving from Daejeon and heavy traffic and talking the stuff about the, horrors of post-unification life. Showering one another with all problems which are not likely to have easy solutions. And finally she said, but she's Korean. I said, wow, but no. Somehow I believe it will work out well. And they said, honestly, we should not think that way, but I believe it will. So first 10, 15 years, maybe 20, will be extremely difficult. North Koreans will see themselves as an underclass. I already mentioned, what are you going to do with North Korean educated elite, who will discover that their skills are not acceptable in the new economy. They will see it as discrimination, but who is going to hire a North Korean doctor who knows how to make this called drip out, this type of IV of an empty beer bottle, yes, but who has never seen modern, CT scan or whichever. Or what are you going to do with 250,000 people who were by that time or who have been in the prison camps? Most of whom are not employable because of their physical and psychological damage of huge proportion. And what are you going to do with not entire North Korean military? Mostly they're just unpaid construction workers. But with elite units, 250,000 people, who spent all their lives learning how to kill people using low-tech weapons. What are you going to do with them? And how are you going to control the real estate speculators from the south, who knows about the value of property, and who will probably persuade North Koreans to sell their houses for the price of a new fridge? What are you going to do with that and this? So I believe about 20 years will be extremely difficult and painful, with a lot of mutual distrust, accusations, and finger pointing. And then things will suddenly become better. And in 20 years, maybe 30 years, younger generation will see themselves as Koreans. They will not understand the bitter hatred of their mothers and fathers. And and it will be very good for the country because, as you have said, it will become a much larger economy. And it will become less vulnerable to the foreign intervention. I'm talking like Korean nationalists, as I have warned you. And it will be good. So, short answer. Long-term prospects, good to brilliant. Short-term, disastrous to very hard.
Two more questions.
Yes, your talk was very, very enlightening. I was just a little bit confused about one of the last points you made about how U.S. and South Korean troops you wish would invade North Korea when it starts to collapse. But I was a little confused because a lot of people seem to be afraid to do that because they're
absolutely is what I'm saying. Yes, yeah.
Start fighting with the U.S. and South Korea.
You're right, yep.
With Russia coming in as well, North Korea, just like the old days when the First Korean War took place.
No. Forget the word Russia. Anyway, later.
Well, let's forget Russia then.
Yeah.
Why the U.S. and South Korea are safe to invade North Korea right now without having to worry about China?
First of all, why they are safe? Because it's a hot pact. First of all, I'm very skeptical whether they will invade. Because, of course, if you have a nice and clean revolution in North Korea, North Korean masses toppling the statues of the dear leader, great leader and whoever else, and waving South Korean flags. And in this case, if it means that South Korean forces will be showered with flowers only, South Koreans will intervene. They will be not happy about it, but they will do it. But I would expect Kim loyalists to have a good fight. And the average South Korean now, does he or she want to send her child to die for unification? Of course not. And they don't want to get involved if it means fighting with Kim loyalists. I would not care about the outside forces. Because unless at the time of unification, China and United States are in very confrontational mood, and unless China sees South Korea as a stooge of the United States, which is possible but not likely, China will not intervene. Why? Because it's a hot potato. A couple of years ago, not far away from this building, not far away from this building, but in the city, I talked to a highly influential Chinese expert. We discussed exactly the idea of the Chinese intervention in case of crisis. And he said, yes, there are reasons to do so, but look, there are reasons for us not to do so. Because it will annoy, it will make China the major enemy of the Korean nationalism. He said. Now, he said, Koreans love hating Japanese and sometimes Americans. They will start hating us in no time if they get involved, China. Second, he said, if it happens, even North Koreans are not going to be thankful. If we install a pro-Chinese government, they will hate us because they will be looking at South Korea. And I said, yes, yes, yes. Look at what we Russians did with Czechoslovakia. The most pro-Russian government country for centuries in Central Europe. We intervened in 1968. We established a popular government, which gave a minor advantage for 20 years and spoiled good relations for centuries, maybe. And they understand it. I'm quoting a very influential Chinese specialist, who is essentially a policy analyst in one of the very important places. So, second, he said. Then he said, all neighboring countries will see it as a signal to start worrying about China. And I said, yes, yes, yes. Next day, all presidents and prime ministers will rush to the airfield to take the first available flyable plane to the United States, to Washington. Yes, he said, yes, they do. So for China, it's a hot potato. North Korea is hot potato for everybody. Nobody wants to get involved with this crisis and reconstruction. So I don't expect that if South Koreans start moving, Chinese will start moving too. And as a matter of fact, if you read carefully what Chinese say, Chinese already make clear the conditions they are going to put on table as a price for accepting a South Korean takeover. And they are quite frank about it. I'm sort of surprised that not much attention is paid to that. And they say, conditions, I can actually give you quotes, I can show it was openly published, and it was not said by some minor academic from second-rate university, it was said by first names in Chinese foreign policy establishment. First, no increase in the US military presence to the Korean peninsula. Second, no support for the irredentist claims in Manchuria. Third, acceptance of the existing Chinese economic rights in North Korea. If you do it, get it. We don't want it. So China is not interested. Talking about Russia, I'm always, as a Russian, asked about Russian interests, and I would say, irrelevant. Very simple. A Russian trade with North Korea, one question. Chinese trade with North Korea last year, just published statistics, $5.4 billion US. It's small change actually. Chinese trade with Chile is roughly 7 times larger. But still, $5.4 billion US trade volume. What is North Korean trade with Russia? 120 million. 40 times difference. 40. It's roughly the show, the level of interest in between these two countries. So I don't expect the international community, everybody will be quite happy if South Koreans rush in, secure a nuclear installation, establish control of the plutonium, immediately ship it out of the country because nobody will be happy if they keep it for more than a few hours, and start paying and paying and paying and paying. But the problem is that, as you have said, South Koreans are not very enthusiastic to do it. And frankly, it's probably the first time I'm saying so, I strongly suspect, of course, a prediction which is not, well, predictions, but still, I strongly suspect when the South Koreans will decide not to get involved, they will use the supposed threats from China, Russia, Japan, Central African Republic as a way to justify doing nothing. We will be very happy to help our brothers. You know, international complications. Because it's better to say we will be happy, but I don't want to spend all my life paying 65% taxes for the people who spend all their lives thinking how to deliver a nuclear device right to my home. So,
One more question in the back.
Yes. I read in a few sources that China said they were going to stop repatriating refugees. What is the legitimacy of that? If it is legitimate, what kind of, is that supposed to be a message? And also, what are the ramifications?
It was reported by Yomiuri. Full stop. Japanese newspaper. And a couple of days later, Lankov, which was just mentioned, checked with their contacts in the Chinese police. And they said, no change in our line, no new instructions. We do not repatriate women who have children here by the Chinese citizens. It's not official, but it's an established practice for years. If you have children with the Chinese, usually they don't touch you. Otherwise, everybody else, if we find them, we are not looking hard, but if we find them, we send them back. But we are not very enthusiastic about it. Well, same line. Theoretically speaking, if China wants to exercise pressure, it might be a good idea. But in this particular case, I believe it was a fake report. It wasn't founded. But they might do it. It seems just in this case it was not founded. Because if they do it, it's one of few vulnerable spots few things China can do to hit North Korea hard, but not excessively hard. Because the Chinese problem, China is not happy about what North Korea is doing, but they don't know how to exercise pressure on North Korea without provoking a whole-scale crisis. Because Chinese position is, they face a choice between a nuclear North Korea they don't like, collapsing North Korea they like even less, and a unified North Korea under a pro-American government, which probably even is less attractive option. Once again, if it comes, they will accept unified Korea. But now they would prefer to keep status quo. The longer the better. Especially because China believe, with good reasons, Chinese leaders and Chinese public believe that time is on Chinese side. And it's probably really the case. Because Chinese economy is growing. You know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, nobody would seriously worry about China in these issues. Now China is the decisive factor. So they need status quo. And they don't want to do something which will jeopardize status quo. So their attitude is keep North Korea alive, unfortunately. But if they discover some ways to make North Korean government very kind of unpleasant to exercise pressure, well, it might be a good idea. Why not? It will not bring a revolution to North Korea, but it will be seen as a serious kind of hit, and it will probably win China some support here. But this particular report was unfounded. It might happen, but not yet.